So is the bass guitar easier to learn than the real guitar? I would say it kind of depends on what we're talking about. When it comes to, certain techniques like sweep picking and alternate picking, like I would say that probably the guitar is actually easier to play than the bass guitar, because if you think about it, the strings are much thicker in diameter and the frets are much farther apart from each other. So if you try and do that same technique like sweep picking, for example, on the bass guitar, that's going to be quite a bit different than doing it on the electric guitar. And not only that, but I find that like using a pick for alternate picking on the electric guitar is kind of easier because the strings aren't as thick, as I said before. But ultimately, I don't think one is really harder than the other. It kind of depends on what type of player you are and what function you have in the band. Now, certain techniques are going to be easier on one instrument than the other. But for the most part, I think like depending on how you approach it, that's going to be more of a factor in terms of its difficulty rather than the instrument itself. And then added to that point is when you have a bass guitar that has even more than 4 strings. So if you have like a 5 string or a 6 string bass, now all of a sudden you have a bass instrument that is really kind of like a guitar, except thicker and longer. The neck is much longer. It takes more force from the fingers to fret the notes, and the frets are further apart from each other, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, I think there's so many similarities between the bass and the electric guitar that, if you can play one pretty well, you can make the transition to the other. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time to get the nuances and to actually figure out how to play the instrument in such a way that's actually, the way it's supposed to be played, quote unquote, whatever you want to call it, whatever that is to people. Everyone kind of has their own way of playing. Like some of the best players are people who did it the way they weren't supposed to, That's kind of how you become, that's how you create new things. But, some of the music theory concepts that you learn on the bass guitar will be similar to the guitar. However, how you approach the instrument is a little bit different in the sense that like how you create bass melodies, you kind of approach it with a different idea in mind, and that being that, the bass is, its purpose is to kind of like marry the harmony and the melody and the rhythm together. You're kind of like providing the backbone of the song. Whereas a guitar, it's like you're kind of just creating the main melody and maybe like stylizing the melody a little bit as well. Whereas the bass, you're kind of providing that like foundation of the song along with the rhythm section, because the bass is always supposed to be kind of played with the kick. But yeah, the bass and the kick, they kind of work together usually. They don't always have to work together, but it's something that it's a good basis to work with. I find like if you are going to make bass lines, especially in hip hop, like this is the same principle in hip hop as well. Like if you think of like an 808 and like the bass sound and the kick, they pretty much always work together in modern hip hop production. In fact, like an 808 was a kick at one point. It's like literally like the convergence of two instruments now. And now the boutique 808, whatever you want to call it, the 808, it's just something that it's like a bass instrument now. It's like a bass and a kick together, and you can play it at different pitches. All that goes to say that, like playing the bass, having the kick and the bass together, it's such a like concrete, part of playing the instrument that now it is its own instrument in itself, But anyway, yeah, so the bass guitar and the guitar, they both use a lot of the same techniques, although they're kind of different in the sense of how you go about them. But ultimately, I feel like if you can play one, you're going to have an easier time transitioning to the other. And another reason why I would say that the bass isn't really that much easier than the guitar is because they're going to take the similar amount of practicing as well to learn how to play it. Assuming that you're starting from zero, assuming that you don't already know how to play the guitar, it's going to take you a while to figure out how to play it. It's going to be the same principles. You're going to have the same struggles. You're going to struggle to fret the notes properly. You're going to struggle to do a lot of the same things, and you're going to have the finger calluses, although they probably won't be as bad because the strings are thicker, so you're not going to have them like digging into your skin as much. But yeah, ultimately the jobs of the two instruments are different, which is kind of what I argued in this article. With the bass, you're providing the foundation, the core, the structure, the backbone of the song. Whereas the guitar, you're kind of making melodies and you're like stylizing the melodies and you're making, I feel like the guitar, you're just like making it cool, I guess. Like you're providing the melody in a way that's supposed to be like cool and sound good. Whereas the bass, it's kind of like the meat, it's like the meat of the track. And another reason why I would say that they're probably not much easier than each other is that they use similar equipment as well. Although you could argue that having a bass is harder because bass equipment is literally heavier. So like you're going to have a harder time carrying that around. But nowadays I feel like everything is digital. Like everybody uses digital amp sims and all this stuff. So I feel like, that's becoming less of a point. But regardless, that has little to do with how you actually learn the instrument as well. And I think where all of this comes from is just like the prevalence of the bass and the electric guitar in popular music, Like if you think of hard rock and metal specifically, the bass is kind of like a meme now. Like it's like a joke. People make fun of bassists like as if they're useless, and it's just like the guitarist who couldn't make it as a guitarist, so they put him on bass. And with guitar solos and all that stuff, that's obviously a lot more prevalent in hard rock and metal. And I mean, a bass solo anyways, like that's hard to work, it's hard to make that work because it's lower end frequencies, and like those frequencies are just not that loud. So when you hear a bass solo, you're just like, what is this? like it just sounds like a bunch of like low end mumbling, you know what I mean? So a guitar, you can actually hear a guitar solo, like it's the higher end frequencies, which are easier for the human ear to hear. So I think that has kind of played a role in the guitar solo's popularity, and thus the guitar stands out more than the bass. And also it seems like there's less notes being played. So I think people automatically assume, well, less notes, easier to play. And while that's true, I think if you approach it like artistically, or in the sense of like providing the structure of the song, I think like providing the structure of the song in a way like perfectly and being a master at that, it's probably equally as hard as just like playing a bunch of fast notes, And finally, the bass guitar, it has less strings than the guitar. Although, as I said before, that can change too if you have a 6-string bass or a 5-string bass or what have you. But anyway, that's about it for this video. All in all, I would say that, a bass guitar, it can be easier than the guitar, but ultimately I think the two are pretty similar in difficulty. Anyway, make sure you like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.